Mencius, also known as Xunzi, lived during a time of great social and political upheaval, and his teachings were both a response to and a critique of the challenges of his age. Below is a detailed biography of Mencius that goes beyond the surface to explore his life, philosophy, and the intellectual legacy he left behind. While going through his life, I would request you to subscribe my channel if you hasn't subscribed. Mencius' life starts. Mencius, born Menki around 372 BCE in the small state of Zhou, located in present-day Shandong province, was destined to become one of the most influential philosophers in Chinese history. His life began during the Warring States period, 475 to 221 BCE, an era of intense political fragmentation and social chaos in China. The Zhou dynasty's central authority had collapsed, and numerous warlords vied for power across the country, leading to continuous warfare, the collapse of social order, and the rise of competing philosophical schools. Little is known of Mencius's early life, but his birth into a modest family set the stage for one of the most famous stories in Chinese folklore, the tale of his mother, Zhang, whose influence on his education became legendary. Mencius's father died when he was very young, leaving Zhang to raise her son alone. In a story immortalized in Chinese culture as Mencius's mother, 3 moves, Zhang is said to have moved their home 3 times to find the right environment for Mencius's moral and intellectual development. Their first home was near a cemetery, but Mencius began imitating the mourning rituals he saw, leading his mother to decide that this was an inappropriate place for a child to grow up. She then moved them near a marketplace, but there, young Mencius began copying the haggling and boisterous behavior of the merchants. Determined to find a more suitable location, Zhang moved again, this time near a school. It was here that Mencius thrived, as he was surrounded by scholars and teachers, ultimately setting him on a path toward a life of learning and virtue. This story illustrates not only Zhang's dedication but also the Confucian ideal that one's environment plays a crucial role in moral and intellectual development. Zhang's influence on Mencius's life was profound. In later years, Mencius himself would highlight the importance of education and environment in cultivating virtue, a key theme in his philosophy. Mencius was educated in the Confucian tradition, a body of thought founded by Confucius, xunzi, 551 to 479 BCE, that emphasized the cultivation of virtue, the importance of proper relationships, and the role of moral governance. As a child, Mencius would have studied the 5 classics, the authoritative Confucian texts that included the Book of Changes, Yijing, the Book of Documents, Shujing, the Book of Odes, Shijing, the Book of Rites, Liji, and the Spring and Autumn Annals, Chunkyu. One of Mencius's most important early influences was Zisi, a grandson of Confucius and a noted philosopher in his own right. It is believed that Mencius studied under Zisi or his disciples, which would have given him direct access to the teachings of Confucius's inner circle. Zisi's focus on moral cultivation and the idea of ren, or benevolence, would deeply influence Mencius's own philosophical outlook. By the time Mencius reached adulthood, he had become an expert in the Confucian classics and was increasingly recognized for his own interpretations of Confucian thought. Like Confucius before him, Mencius believed in the transformative power of education and the idea that rulers should govern with virtue, benevolence, and a deep concern for the welfare of the people. However, Mencius would take these ideas further. developing a more optimistic view of human nature and articulating a powerful argument for the moral responsibilities of rulers. The intellectual environment during Mencius's lifetime was one of intense debate and competing philosophical systems. The Warring States period was marked by the rise of rival schools of thought, each offering different solutions to the problem of restoring order to a fractured society. In addition to Confucianism, there were the rival ideologies of legalism, Taoism, and Mohism, all of which attracted followers and influenced political leaders. Legalism, in particular, was a dominant force at the time. Advocating for strict laws, harsh punishments, and centralized power, legalists like Shang Yang, 393–38 BCE, and Han Feizi, 282–33 BCE, believed that human nature was inherently selfish and corrupt, and that only strong, coercive institutions could maintain order. In contrast, Taoists like Laozi and xunzi sought harmony through disengagement from worldly affairs, emphasizing simplicity, spontaneity, and alignment with the natural world. Mencius, however, positioned himself squarely in the Confucian tradition, arguing that human nature was fundamentally good, and that virtue, not coercion, was the key to social harmony. His travels across the states, advising rulers and engaging in debates, were marked by his attempts to persuade political leaders to adopt Confucian principles of moral governance. Like Confucius before him, Mencius aspired to bring his teachings to the rulers of his time, hoping to influence the politics of the day. He believed deeply in the Confucian ideal of xunzi, the gentleman, or noble person, who governs with virtue, wisdom, and a deep concern for the common people. Mencius traveled from one feudal court to another, offering his advice to kings and nobles, urging them to rule with ren, benevolence, and yi, righteousness. One of his most famous encounters was with King Hui of Liang, a ruler who sought advice on how to strengthen his state. Mencius's response was that the best way to enrich the state was to practice benevolent governance and care for the people, rather than focusing solely on military might or territorial expansion. He argued that a ruler who governed with virtue would earn the loyalty and trust of his people, thus creating a stable and prosperous state. Mencius's ideas were often at odds with the prevailing attitudes of the time, especially among rulers who were more concerned with power and conquest than with the moral welfare of their subjects. He is said to have grown frustrated with the inability of most rulers to heed his advice, and like Confucius, Mencius found little success in implementing his ideals at the highest levels of government. Yet Mencius's political philosophy remains one of his most enduring contributions. His argument that the people are more important than the state was revolutionary in its time, as it placed the welfare of the common people above the interests of the ruler. This concept, which would later be developed into the idea of the mandate of heaven, held that a ruler's legitimacy was based not on power or birthright, but on moral virtue and the consent of the governed. If a ruler failed to act in the interests of the people, he could justifiably be overthrown. Mencius's belief in the moral duties of rulers and the rights of the people would influence political thought in China for centuries, becoming a cornerstone of Confucian political philosophy. His advocacy for benevolent governance would later inspire reformers and revolutionaries alike, shaping the discourse around leadership, authority, and the role of government. Perhaps the most distinctive feature of Mencius's philosophy is his theory of human nature. In stark contrast to the legalists, who saw human beings as inherently selfish and prone to disorder, Mencius argued that human nature is fundamentally good. He believed that all people are born with an innate sense of morality, but that this moral potential must be cultivated through education and proper guidance.
Mencius famously used the metaphor of the sprouts, likening human virtues to seeds that, when nurtured, grow into fully developed moral qualities. He identified 4 primary virtues that he believed were inherent in all people: ren, benevolence; yi, righteousness; li, propriety; and ji, wisdom. These virtues, he argued, were the sprouts of moral development, and they could be cultivated or stifled depending on the individual's environment and actions. One of Mencius's most famous illustrations of human nature is his story of a child falling into a well. He argued that if any person were to see a child about to fall into a well, their immediate reaction would be one of alarm and compassion, not because they sought personal gain, but because they naturally felt concern for the child's safety. This reaction, Mencius claimed, was evidence of humanity's inherent goodness. However, if this innate moral sense is not cultivated, it can be overshadowed by selfish desires or external pressures. Mencius's view of human nature had profound implications for his political and ethical philosophy. He believed that because people are naturally inclined toward goodness, rulers should not govern through fear or coercion, but through moral example and benevolent policies that encourage the cultivation of virtue in both the ruler and the people. According to Mencius, a ruler who practices benevolence, ren, and righteousness, yi, will naturally inspire these qualities in his subjects. In this way, good governance flows from the top down, and society flourishes when it is led by ethical, virtuous leaders. For Mencius, governing through fear and force only leads to resentment and rebellion, as it stifles the people's natural inclinations toward goodness and creates an environment of distrust. In contrast, a benevolent ruler who treats the people with compassion and justice earns their loyalty and respect, which in turn leads to a stable and prosperous society. Mencius argued that the welfare of the people was the primary responsibility of the ruler, and he believed that the legitimacy of a ruler was directly tied to his ability to meet this responsibility. This idea is encapsulated in Mencius's concept of the mandate of heaven.
While the concept originated with earlier thinkers, Mencius expanded and deepened its meaning.
In his view, the mandate of heaven was not something that rulers could claim by divine right or inheritance. Rather, it was contingent on their moral behavior. If a ruler failed to govern justly and oppressed the people, he could lose the mandate of heaven, and it would be morally justified for the people to overthrow him. This concept laid the groundwork for later political philosophies that emphasized the moral accountability of leaders and the right of the people to resist tyranny.
Central to Mencius's philosophy was his belief in the transformative power of education. Just as a ruler must govern with virtue to set a good example for the people, individuals must be educated to cultivate their natural moral tendencies. Mencius believed that moral education was the key to developing the virtues of benevolence, righteousness, propriety, and wisdom. Without proper education, these innate sprouts of virtue might wither or be overshadowed by selfish desires.
Education, for Mencius, was not simply a matter of acquiring knowledge or skills. It was a process of moral development, aimed at cultivating the individual's character and aligning their actions with the principles of Confucian ethics. He believed that all people had the potential to become xunzi, or noble persons, through proper education and self-cultivation. This idea resonated deeply in Confucian tradition, which held that the moral character of individuals, particularly those in positions of leadership, was the foundation of a just and harmonious society. Mencius also placed great emphasis on the role of teachers and mentors in guiding moral development. He saw the teacher-student relationship as one of mutual respect and responsibility, where the teacher's role was to nurture the students' innate virtues and help them realize their full potential. This emphasis on education as a means of cultivating virtue became a cornerstone of Confucian thought, and it would continue to shape Chinese society for centuries. The ideas and teachings of Mencius were later compiled into a text known simply as the Mencius, which became one of the 4 books of Confucianism. This collection of dialogues, conversations, and philosophical discussions between Mencius and various rulers, as well as his disciples, provides a comprehensive view of his thought and expands upon many of the themes first articulated by Confucius. In the Mencius, we see his philosophy come to life through lively debates, parables, and historical references, making it one of the most engaging texts in the Confucian canon. The Mencius is organized into 7 books, each containing a series of dialogues that explore topics such as the nature of human goodness, the responsibilities of rulers, the importance of education, and the role of moral virtue in governance. Through these dialogues, Mencius elaborates on his central belief that human beings are born with an innate moral sense, and that this sense must be nurtured through education and ethical leadership. One of the most famous passages in the Mencius is his conversation with King Xuan of Qi, in which Mencius argues that the well-being of the people should be the primary concern of any ruler. He uses the metaphor of shepherding to describe the role of the ruler. Just as a good shepherd cares for the welfare of his flock, a virtuous ruler must care for the welfare of his people. In this way, Mencius reinforced the Confucian ideal of ren, or benevolence, as the guiding principle of governance. Another key idea explored in the Mencius is the notion that right conduct, yi, is an essential component of human life. Mencius believed that individuals must act in accordance with what is right, not simply what is expedient or beneficial to them personally. This emphasis on righteousness over self-interest set Mencius apart from many other philosophers of his time, particularly the legalists, who argued that self-interest and strict laws were the foundation of order.
Mencius's ideas would come to exert a profound influence on Chinese thought and society, especially during the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE, 220 CE, when Confucianism was adopted as the official state philosophy. His emphasis on the goodness of human nature, the moral responsibilities of rulers, and the importance of education resonated deeply with subsequent generations of scholars and rulers. During the Song dynasty, 960–1279 CE, Mencius's works became part of the 4 books, which, along with the 5 classics, formed the core of the Confucian educational curriculum. These texts were required reading for those who wished to enter the civil service, ensuring that Mencius's ideas would continue to shape the intellectual and political life of China for centuries. In later centuries, Mencius's influence spread beyond China, as Confucianism became a dominant cultural force in Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. His ideas about governance, education, and morality became embedded in the political and ethical systems of East Asia, contributing to the development of a Confucian cultural sphere that transcended national boundaries. Mencius's influence extended even further during the 20th century, when his emphasis on the moral responsibilities of rulers and the rights of the people inspired reformers and revolutionaries. His philosophy of governance, which prioritized the welfare of the people over the interests of the state, was invoked by political thinkers who sought to challenge authoritarian regimes and promote more just and humane forms of government. After all these, Mencius died around 289 BCE, but his ideas lived on through his disciples and the text that bears his name. Although he did not achieve the widespread political influence he sought during his lifetime, his philosophical contributions would leave an indelible mark on Chinese and East Asian thought. Over the centuries, Mencius came to be revered as one of the great sages of Confucianism, and his ideas continue to be studied and debated by scholars around the world. In modern times, Mencius's teachings have been re-examined in light of contemporary political and ethical challenges.
His belief in the goodness of human nature, his advocacy for compassionate governance, and his insistence on the moral responsibilities of leaders have inspired discussions about human rights, democracy, and the role of morality in public life. As the world continues to grapple with questions of governance, justice, and the well-being of people, Mencius's insights remain as relevant as ever.
In sum, Mencius's life and philosophy represent a profound commitment to the belief that human beings are capable of goodness, and that this goodness can be realized through education, moral leadership, and the creation of just and benevolent societies. His legacy as Confucianism's second sage endures, not only in the annals of Chinese history but also in the hearts and minds of those who seek to build a better world through the cultivation of virtue and the practice of compassion. Now you know who was Mencius, why he was famous for. How's your opinion about him? Comment below. If you love him, let's make one like for this beautiful soul, and I would like you to thank you for subscribing my channel for my support. Lastly, let's take a leave and again meet at another interesting story. Up to that time, goodbye, have a nice day. May God bless you and your family.